We are live. And it is a Thursday morning, glorious outside. Not a bad way to start the day. Here with Andrew Murphy. Andrew, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
How's your week been so far?
It's been pretty good. Yeah, I've been enjoying the Melbourne weather as much as you can. With the current lockdown, it's been equal measures of brilliant sunshine and raining skies.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
trying to enjoy both of them.
I think the phrase is hashtag so Melbourne.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
um, for those heathens who are watching or listening or even reading who don't know you, do you want to do a really quick 30-second intro?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in technology my entire life. Yeah, I started writing code when I was 8 years old, and I've just lived and breathed technology for as long as I can remember, pretty much. Started my career in the UK. Eventually found my way to Australia about 5 years ago. But pretty much throughout my entire career, I've lived at the intersection between software and soft skills. And
Nice.
that's kind of my happy place. As much as I love being involved in software development and technology, I love leadership skills and communication skills and influence skills and all those things that make you a really effective leader in technology, kind of understanding both sides of that, that triangle of soft skills and software.
Beautiful, fantastic. And so we're obviously still in lockdown 365, day
Mm,
3,000, whatever it is.
yeah,
And COVID sort of introduced these whole bunch of new challenges for all of us. But one thing that's not discussed that often is people like yourself, leaders moving into leadership roles, inheriting teams, which is tough enough to do
yeah,
regardless, even when you're back in the office, but brings a whole set of new challenges when working remotely. And that's kind of the stuff that we're going to unpack in this discussion. So I'm expecting some absolute gold-plated nuggets of advice and tips for people who probably find themselves in this position. So in your view, then, what do you think are these real challenges of leading remotely?
I mean, it's all the challenges that exist in person plus a whole heap more.
Mm,
So, whatever the challenges are with onboarding yourself onto a new job as a leader or not a leader, plus the challenges of onboarding yourself as a leader, plus the challenges of being remote, all together in a big mismatch.
yeah.
It's honestly can be quite overwhelming if you don't sit down and build strategies to tackle all of these things.
Mm,
Since we started lockdown, I've actually onboarded myself into two jobs. I had a 6 month contract that I onboarded myself into, and then my current employment that I joined 12 months ago. And it can be a big challenge if you don't put focus in the right areas. There's if you think about when you're physically in an office, you just bump into people all the time. We've had this experience of starting a new job throughout our entire careers, and you just see people around the office, and you bump into people going for coffees and standing around the kitchen, and that kind of stuff just doesn't happen. It
mm,
can be so easy for you to just be this text on Slack as
mm,
opposed to a human being.
mm,
And a lot of these strategies and these challenges we're going to talk about are all aimed at kind of turning you from those words in Slack to a fully rounded human being.
mm.
And the same for the people you're working with. You want them to be fully rounded human beings to you,
Yeah,
and that's all these things are focused on pretty much.
yeah. And in this world we're in at the moment, where there seems to be, what one side of a debate, if you want to call it that, who are all about, we should be able to work remotely and work wherever we want to work, and I totally understand that. But I think what we're seeing now, after getting on for 2 years of lockdown, is the other side of the debate saying we're craving human contact, we're
Mm,
craving human
yeah,
interaction. The thrill of working from home, after the first few months, has well and truly worn off. I want to see
yeah.
people. I want to see my friends again. And
I'm a
so,
bona fide introvert. Like if on the introvert scale, if you slid the scale all the way to one side, that's me,
yeah,
and I'm craving human connection.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, when you and I sort of first sort of discussed the idea of doing this, there was a phrase that you used that sort of really resonated me about the way that we interact in
Yeah.
person versus the way that we interact at the moment on video calls like this. And I won't steal your thunder, but I'll let you sort of focus on it.
Yeah, it was something that I started observing. So yeah, I mentioned that I onboarded myself onto a 6 month contracts job, and things didn't go as well as I was expecting. And so I was kind of interrogating what happened and why things weren't as positive as I was expecting. Because, this world of remote work was new to me as well. And one of the things I realized was we're losing what used to be called the water cooler moments. Those things which are you're stood around just talking about things. But
Mm.
like, it's not just water cooler moments. It's not just going to get coffee. It's things like meetings are scheduled now, and everybody turns up. Well, we're
Or
in
not.
Australia. We're in Australia, so everybody turns up at 2 or 3 minutes past. But everybody turns up pretty much on the moment.
Yeah.
And then when the meeting ends, because you've got another meeting straight afterwards, everybody just closes their Zoom or their Meets. And you lose these things at the beginning and ends of meetings that you used to have, where people used to have chats and discussions, and how's your dog doing? How's your family doing? And these things are what I've started calling non-transactional conversations,
Mm.
to contrast them with what we seem to be doing now in the world of work, which is having these very transactional conversations. When you speak to somebody, it's because you want something, because you want to get something from
Mm.
them, because
Mm.
you want to tell them something, or give them something. And it's a very transactional way of communicating, because we've lost these moments of non-transactionality.
Mm.
And part of what we need to do in the world of remote work is to bring those non-transactional conversations back, because
Yeah.
they're incredibly important.
Mm. And they're they're the very human moments, aren't they?
Yeah,
They're the moments where you go out for lunch as a team on a Friday, where you go to the nearest coffee shop, and someone gets a donut and someone gets a pan of chocolate, and then you have the debate on the way back about which is best
spot
and
on.
where you get the best
Yeah,
pan of chocolates from. Um, I have a figure built by pan of chocolate. Um, but these are the very human moments that create connection within teams,
and
that make
trust.
and trust, that make the transactional conversations you have in work, they make them so much easier because
Exactly,
you've built this trust.
exactly.
And they're really hard things to replicate when you're remote. And I really feel for
Yeah,
people who've onboarded into a new team, maybe in the last 6 months, haven't even met any of their new team members yet.
definitely.
Hashtag might not even do this year the way we're
Yeah,
going.
I was having a chat with another company, and they part of their business model is they embed their consultants, and they embed their employees in other companies.
Mm.
And they told me a story of how they had two employees that were working at the same client that didn't even know that they were
Mm.
consultants for the same company. So
Mm.
they were in a meeting with each other, talking to each other, and they didn't know they both worked for this external consultancy.
Yeah.
And it's just because you're just missing all of these things that happen.
Mm. Mm.
and
Mm.
and these are the lubrication, the smoothness that makes all of those other
Mm.
things work well.
Mm.
And it can be really hard to, as a leader, it can be really hard to bring these things in remotely that don't feel like mandated fun time.
Mm.
That's the thing we don't
Mm.
want to do. We don't want somebody to go, oh, not another Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
I've had my 8 Zoom meetings a day, and now you want me to, hop on a lunchtime get together for another Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really hard to strike that balance
Yeah.
between building these things and not overloading people.
Yeah. The next person invites me to a trivia thing. You
Exactly.
know,
Exactly.
watch out for your Slack. Yeah, I totally get it. And there's this thing that we've in some cases we've sort of transitioned from working from home to living at work, and
Yeah.
that's a almost a
Yeah.
separate thing to tackle there from productivity, mental health, and all those sorts of things. Um, but but it's still this. How do you rehumanize as much as possible the work
Yeah.
experience for people? And so I'm sure you've got a couple of ideas.
Yeah, it's interesting, because this is a topic I talked a lot about in the early pandemic, was this difference between working from home and living at work, because there's actually a huge amount of differences between those two.
Mm.
And one really important thing is we lose what I call transitional activities. So, if you think in the before times, we used to commute to work, and that was this really great transitional activity that got us out of home life and into work brain, and got us out of work brain and into home life. But literally, my bedroom is 4 meters in that direction.
Mm.
That's not it's not a compelling commute. It's not something which it gives me the time to switch my brain around and to go from home mode to work mode. So the one thing we're definitely missing is these transitional moments. And one thing I used to advise people to do early in the pandemic is just to walk around the block before they start work.
Mm.
And as soon as so get up, have your coffee, have your breakfast, leave, walk around the block, come back in and go to the work desk.
Mm.
And that transitional moment of going, okay, I'm in work mode now. And at the end of the day, doing the opposite, leaving, walking around the block, coming back in, never going back to your work desk again. And just building these stages of this: I'm now at work, I'm now at home, even though you're physically coexistent in the same place. I think is incredibly important.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Do you have to go the reverse journey on the way home?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And walk backwards if you can,
With a newspaper. Brilliant. Brilliant. That's a great idea. And you're right. It's that separation. I remember one of my very early jobs in Australia. I lived literally about 2 minutes from the office before I was in recruitment. And because I lived closely, if something happened, someone would just phone me and say, "Hey, can you go to the office and just do this thing?" And they'd find that 10 o'clock at night, I was a new kid. I was like, Jesus, every other night I'm having to go and do something. So there's this sort of that peril, isn't there? So yeah, nice. So getting up, having those transitional moments, getting into work mode, maybe go out, get your coffee from your favorite coffee shop, walk
Great
back,
idea.
have your work coffee at your desk.
Great idea.
Then you're ready to go. In terms of the interactions with your teams, what sort of things are you seeing there that you can get some of those non-transactional sort of moments back?
Yeah. So, it's kind of playing into we kind of jokingly said it earlier, the Australian start to a meeting is 2 or 3 minutes past, like, kind of doubling down on that and accepting the inevitability of that. I don't plan any meeting to start exactly when I send the invite to. I plan for it to start 5 minutes afterwards because, people are going to run late. People are in another meeting that's running late. It takes a while for them to get their webcam sorted. And so I definitely, every meeting I plan to start at 5 minutes past, and I try to finish it 5 minutes before the end of when I actually schedule it in, just to build in some of these non-transactional conversations. Another thing that I try and do is video for a lot of people, especially people like me who are introverts. It feels a lot more mentally taxing. And so I definitely encourage, not all the time, but for some of those social activities, video off. And I know that's quite a controversial subject. And I will be the first to say, if you're in a work meeting, if this is an important conversation, if this is something which is a transactional conversation, video should be on. 100%, because you're losing so much data, you're losing so much information about the other person if video is off. But if you're wanting a way to build rapport, to build trust, then I think it is important to give people that choice and to have some video on, some video off, because it gives the introverts like me a chance to kind of engage in a non-challenging way. We just as in person, if we're in person and I'm wearing a social event, we used to do all hands in the office in the before times. And we used to have people who would just walk away and go and sit at their desk for a little bit and decompress and have the social energy kind of built back up, because for them, being in a group of people is challenging. It's really hard to do that remotely because your face is on the screen. And so giving people that option to kind of virtually step out from being fully engaged I think is important
Yeah.
for work social activities.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great idea, and I also think there's this thing of, when we're in person, I think we're generally a bit more accepting of, oh, Dave's got to run to the bathroom before we can
Yeah,
have this break.
exactly.
Someone's got to do that, and oh, Jim's just picked up a call from someone important, like a customer. He'll be here in 2 minutes. But when we're
Yeah,
on video and we're all clock watching,
yeah,
it's easy to get a little bit. Oh, come on, Dave, for
yeah,
God's sake, So I,
exactly.
I think it's just all of us perhaps just being a bit kinder to each other to a certain degree, and just
Definitely.
just a bit more accepting that everyone's everyone's finding this challenging. There's nothing worse than you've had 3 half-hour Zoom meetings one after the other, and you need a bathroom break, but people are waiting for it's
Exactly.
just life.
And it's especially, right now in Melbourne, for example, schools are closed.
Mm,
And so, lots of people have kids at home, and expecting them to be working and as the 8 hours a day, 9 till 5
mm,
that they used to
mm,
do 6 months ago, and be responsive immediately to any request for communication is just completely
mm,
unreasonable.
mm,
Like
mm.
that's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
And so, we need to be a lot more accommodating of that as well.
yeah, and I think going back the other way, the commitments we make to customers or up the
Mm,
chain to directors around estimates for building things,
yeah.
just factor all these things in. And
Well, we had a really interesting conversation internally where I work now, where um, one of our delivery leads on a project was kind of worried that this is when the latest lockdown, um, had just happened, and
35.
yeah, lockdown 35, yeah, and he was trying to work out how he could say to his team that they've got to work more hours to deliver the same amount of work for the deadline the client had asked for, and we just said, no, just speak to the client. Just say to
Yeah,
the client, like, we're in lockdown.
yeah,
The half of our team have their kids at home.
yeah,
There is no way we can output the same amount of work in the same amount of time.
mm,
Any client that is worth working with is going to understand that.
yeah,
And so your first step has to be, say, let the client know that this is
mm,
what is going on. Let the client know that we're investigating ways of dealing with this, and we're trying to find ways to make sure that the impact is as small as possible. But there is going to be an impact. There
yeah,
is absolutely no way there cannot be one.
yeah.
And you know most clients are completely understanding of that.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think anyone at the moment who has clients, external clients I'm talking about, probably recognizes that in a normal world, clients almost expect you as a consulting business they expect more from you than they perhaps do with their own employees.
Mm,
So then expecting more on top of that,
yeah,
despite pandemic.
yeah,
These are really, I joke about it because I'm recapping conversations I've had recently, but, but, but as leaders, we've got to be able to manage those expectations,
yes,
have these human
yeah,
conversations. And I think when you
yeah.
frame things the right way, people get it. Like most people get it, and are
But
generally pretty accommodating.
it's communication skills.
Mm,
A big drum that I bang consistently, in leadership is 50% of leadership is communication.
mm,
Just
mm,
learning and understanding how to express what you want to express in
mm,
a compelling way, in an understandable way, in
mm.
an efficient and effective way is just, it is the thing that makes you a better leader.
Yeah.
And whether that's a team lead, a project lead, a discipline lead,
Mm.
a CEO, or whatever it is, it's communication is just incredibly important.
Yeah, and I mean, we interview umpteen people per day, per week, and for leadership roles, the things that people say, but often the things they don't say
Yeah,
are
yeah,
those little cues that they give us on how
hmm
they think about this challenge of leadership.
hmm
Um, so coming back to sort of rewinding slightly, um, you're a leader who's moving into a new remote role. You're going to be inheriting a new team remotely. If you were going to give someone sort of three things to think about, I don't know why we always ask for three. It seems the thing. If you were going to give someone sort of three things to consider and start planning
hmm
and thinking about before they move into that new role, what would they be?
Sure. So first thing, one of the first things they teach you in leadership school, Leadership 101, is having one-to-ones. And they teach you about the value of what I call one-dimensional one-to-ones.
Mm.
So this is, the person you report into and your direct reports,
Yeah.
like one-dimensional, up and down. And I agree, like that's baseline. That's something that you just have to do. If that isn't being checked off, then you just need to do it.
Yeah.
Most more experienced leaders focus on two-dimensional one-to-ones where they're going up and down, but they're also going to their peers and they're spending time, investing time in building relationships with their peers. Incredibly important when you onboard yourself into a new job, even more so remotely, is this two-dimensional building of relationships. But I actually encourage people to think three-dimensionally and to not only build relationships with their boss and their direct reports and the people underneath them, not only to build relationship with their peers. So, if you're head of software dev, to also build relationships with head of design and head of product and head of people, but to actually go into their direct report lines a little bit, obviously discussing this with your peers, but to actually break those barriers. Like I have a lot of conversations with my peers' direct reports. What the chapter lead for product strategy and I have a fortnightly 1 hour session where we just talk about product strategy and product design and the interface between that and software dev. And even though this person is not even in my reporting line, in my reporting vertical, not even in my horizontal, they're distinctly separate. By doing that, I'm building trust with that person.
Yeah.
And I'm letting that person understand that I'm not somebody that's going to purely push the agenda of engineering in my company. I'm not somebody that is only advocating for just engineering excellence above everything else. I care about product. I care about product strategy. I care about enough to invest an hour of my time once a fortnight with the person who is heading up this drive at the company I work for. And so, that three-dimensional one-to-one is how you can build trust in a strategic way, because that's what a lot of this comes down to, especially when you're a new leader joining a team, especially when you're doing it remotely. Building trust is the thing you should be focused on. Building trust with your boss, building trust with your team and your peers, with the rest of the organization as well. Don't forget that.
Brilliant.
And on the so that's number one. On the vein of building trust, another thing is to make sure that you build trust with your direct reports. What I worked really, really hard on in my current job is I knew coming in within the first couple of weeks, I knew coming in that I needed to restructure. I knew that I needed to change reporting lines. I knew that I needed to move some people out of leadership that were currently in leadership. And I had to make big changes. But if I'd have come in and done that on week 3, I wouldn't have built up the trust with the team for them to believe that the reasons I was doing this was in their best interests.
Yeah.
Like I needed them to know that the changes I were making were not because I was coming in with, external ideas of what the best thing was. And I wanted to impose what was best for me. I wanted them to know that what I was doing was the best for them. And so that takes a focus on building trust with my team.
Yeah.
And also, as arrogant as what I just said sounded, there is also the other side of that, which is I could have been wrong. Fundamentally, I could have been wrong.
Yeah.
And so by building trust with the team, what that also allows them to do is to go, Andrew, you're wrong. And this is why you're wrong. And I can assess that. Whereas if I come in and don't listen and don't build trust and don't give them the autonomy to tell me they think I'm wrong, then I could miss something completely, which is just it's just deadly to a new leader. Is making a change too soon without all the information.
Yeah, and I think there's a sliding into as a little bit of leadership 101 is that you don't have to be right all the time. Exactly. As a leader, your job isn't to be right. Exactly. Which I think a lot of new leaders sort of fall into this thing. Right now, I'm the leader. I'm technically might be brilliant and all that sort of stuff, and I have to be right about things. Yeah, that's not your job. Your job isn't to be right.
I am not the best software developer in the world. I'll tell you what, like
Yeah.
I haven't written production source code in about 5 years, and nobody wants me to.
Yeah.
Even me,
Yeah.
like you do not want me writing production source code.
Yeah.
But there's no way, like in my current place, I head up the front end team, the back end team, the mobile team, the video games team, the AI and ML team, and there is no way that I can be the expert in all of
Mm.
those things.
Mm.
No one person can be an expert in all of
Yeah.
those things, and so I don't try. Like what I focus on is I focus on having strong leaders in those disciplines that I can trust.
Yeah.
And that's really your job, especially when you're at the executive level.
Mm.
Your main number one job is to build a team of great leaders underneath you.
Yeah.
And your job is to find and identify them internally if they
Mm.
exist,
Mm.
and if they don't exist, to find and identify them externally and bring them in,
Yeah.
and to focus on doing that in a way that doesn't bruise anybody's egos.
Yeah.
Is incredibly important.
Brilliant. So going back to our three things, first one was the three-dimensional relationships.
Yeah.
Second one was the building the trust.
Yeah.
And a third.
I don't think I gave you a third
no,
one.
you didn't.
Yeah,
No, that's
I
why
didn't
I was
give you a
coming back
third
to
one.
it. Do we have one, or should we
So I
stick with
think,
the big two?
well, no, I think the other thing, really is to have a strong stretch of time where you're focused on learning. This was kind of implicit in what I said about the building trust bit. Is part of it's incredibly important that when you join a new team, especially remotely, you focus on learning in your first month or two, because going back to those non-transactional conversations we talked about earlier, a lot of them, a lot of those non-transactional conversations are social, and they're about building connections with people. But a lot of them are also the tidbits you hear about particular projects, or the glances that you get of. One of the great pieces of advice I give people when they're trying to make change in an organization is the people leaders are not always the thought leaders. And when you're making change in an organization, the people you need to influence are not the people leaders, they're the thought leaders. Sometimes they're the same, most of the time they're not.
Yeah.
And in software development, it is so easy to find who the thought leaders are. Just go in there and break production, and watch and see who everybody swivels their seats around and looks at for help when you've just broken production. Like, those are the thought leaders outright. And so, understanding who those thought leaders are and understanding, what influence they have in the organization is incredibly important. And that's hard to do remotely. So give yourself a month or two to just understand what's going on, to focus on learning, and not to make any strong commitments with it, especially within those first few weeks. You can make strong commitments for investigating and learning and discovering and building of a strategy, but you shouldn't be making any commitments on what that strategy is.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's this thing that sometimes we forget, is that quite often it's the people closest to the problem source that are the ones you should be asking for the info. So if it's we're having trouble rolling out this new feature when a customer spins up an account, whatever it is, whoever controls the deployment of that out of AWS or wherever they're pushing it from, that are having to go in manually and do it, when a year ago they suggested automating by doing this, but nobody wanted to know. They're the people closest to the problem. So
it's so important to get us, especially in the beginning, as close to the people doing the work as you can. Like, just dive down deep. When I joined my current job, I didn't dev code, but I did actually operate as the technical lead on a project, just to kind of understand, how do we run projects? How does it work? What are the expectations? What are the clients like? How's our client relationship skills? How are we setting the clients up for success? How are we setting the teams up for success? And the best way to do that is just to get right down as low as you possibly can in the beginning. And then extricate yourself from that. Do not stay down there.
That's it. There's very rarely, in my experience, people who start a new job and say to themselves, right, I'm going to do as little as possible, and going to do what I do. I'm going to do a crappy job of.
No.
I think
Yeah.
there's a journey that people get to, and it's one of the biggest killers within
Yeah.
teams that I see is indifference. When people are
Yes.
indifferent to what's being produced,
Yeah.
what's being sent live, then you've got a real challenge. And that
Yeah.
indifference usually comes from frustration to not being listened to, and frustration from people thinking that their opinions don't matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which comes back to the trust thing that you're talking about.
Exactly. And the counteraction to that, the word that people, as I work with people, they get sick of me using the same words over and over again. But I think it's incredibly important to have a consistent message. And one of the words that I use a lot is the word ownership.
Yep.
I want people to feel ownership of what they're doing, and that disengagement is the opposite end of the spectrum to ownership. I want people to not only feel ownership of the project they're on, but I want them to feel ownership of the process and the client, and the difference between the outputs and the outcomes. First step is to feel ownership over the output. That is minimum bar. If you do not feel ownership over the output of what you're doing, I do not want you in my organization. You will get gold stars and promotions and pay rises up the Yahoo if you feel outcome based ownership. Because absolutely. That's what I want people to focus on.
And if we as leaders and as businesses are creating environments where people feel that they do have that and they get listened to, I was going to say be listened to, that wouldn't even be proper English. If they feel like they're getting listened to and that their opinions matter, then we're creating that.
Exactly. And it's such an important point. Expecting somebody to get it to feel ownership over something, but not empowering them and not putting them in an environment where that's even possible. Like that's our job as leaders, is to put them in an environment where that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. We could talk about this all day, couldn't we? There's a danger. There's a real danger we might do. It'll probably be the world's most boring lesson for anyone except us. So recapping on our three things then, for people starting new remote roles with inheriting a team, building your 3-dimensional relationships. Really, really important for a whole bunch of reasons. Do it the right way. Number 2 was...
You're putting me on the spot now, Simon. So number 2 was, focus on trust building, focus within your team, focus on people being able to tell you that they think you're wrong. That's my bar of when I've built trust with somebody. If you can look me in the eyes and tell me, Andrew, I think you're wrong, we've built enough trust up with each other. And then number 3 was, part of how you do both of those things is to give yourself time to learn and time to develop.
So 3D, trust and learning. There's a title there for a video. Thank you so much. This was brilliant, and I think people listening to this are going to take some stuff away. If you're comfortable, we'll put a link to your site in the comments. If people want to hit you up with questions, they can do that. This has been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday, and we will speak really, really soon. Done. Come on.
Cool.
We'll cut it there. That was brilliant. I'm just going to kill Zencastr.